Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the another conversation in the series Economy in Plain English. Today, we're joined by Dr. Andrea Barry, and we're live on LinkedIn, X, and YouTube. So the Economy in Plain English is brought to you by the David Hume Institute and journalist Clare English. We are on a mission to increase understanding of the economy, what it is, how it works, and all in plain English. If you have any questions as you go, please add them into the chat boxes and we'll try and incorporate them. And that's all from me, because we're whizzing through this conversation in half an hour. Over to Clare.
Thank you very much. It's always a bit of a miracle of technology when this all comes together, and it very nearly didn't again. So Susan and I have now got a lot of grey hair underneath this colour. It's wonderful to be with you again. It's going to be 30 minutes. Please use the time and get your chats into us, your questions into us for Andrea. Lots of interesting stuff's going to come up in the course of this. I am the English in the plain English because I need to de-jargonise, de-geek the economy so that we can all understand why it's so important that we understand this stuff. We've got elections coming up. I say this every time, but if we don't understand why it's important to know this stuff, we're missing a trick. So we hope to educate, entertain, and inform without being the BBC. Now, I'm going to just introduce you to our lovely guest, Dr. Andrea Barry. It's lovely to see you and a relief to see you, actually, Andrea, on our screens, and great to welcome you onto this. And can you tell us a little bit, just very brief headlines, a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So yeah, hi, I'm Andrea. I do not like using Dr. Barry. I rarely use that, but I do have a PhD in economics. I have studied economics for the last over 15 years, and I love the subject. I love what I do. I get to study why people do the way things they do and why outcomes and what people can do is what they can do. And that's essentially what my job is at Youth Futures Foundation.
Sorry, we're going to talk about your foundation again. Say the name again. I cut across you.
Youth Futures Foundation.
Right. We're going to talk about that as well. So I think it's so important that you're saying that it connects with reality and our lived experience, what we do every single day. Because when we see that word economics, a lot of us that aren't economists or don't study it or did study it a long time ago are a bit, that's for other people, it's for experts. But you've kind of given me a hint that you love economics. So this is maybe a redundant question. Did you come out the womb being an economist, or did you evolve from some other life form, or I don't know, normal civilian?
Oh, my family don't think I'm normal, quite frankly. Most of the time they have no idea what I do and they just say I do stuff. But I was actually, so I, as you can tell from my accent, I'm from the States. I went to undergrad uni in the States in Washington, D.C., even though I am from Chicago. And I think when you go to uni in that environment, which is essentially the government environment, D.C. is largely the federal government. I was at first pre-med, so I was taking all of the required courses to go to med school in the U.S. But as it's the U.S. system, they require you to do some like random courses to make sure you stay a well-rounded individual. And one of them was economics. It was macroeconomics 1, and I loved it. Why? And I switched. I switched majors.
It's weird. I'm saying macroeconomics 1 versus medicine. I'm thinking, oh, that's okay. So tell me why.
I think it's just because I had always been really interested in things like inequality and injustice and poverty. I mean, at one point I was thinking about going to law school as well. And I just really wanted to do something about that. And I think like most people, I didn't think economics or politics really could do anything like that. I guess maybe that was my own misconceptions about what the economics background looks like. But when I saw how you could use and how the original history of economics was really about explaining some of these inequalities and how people look different. And when I say look different, they have different things that they were able to do in an economy and how we used to explain an economy. My interest was piqued. I think my original idea was maybe to work at international development and maybe go and see how things are working in the rest of the world. You know, living in the US, Washington, D.C. bubble, I immediately wanted to see how the rest of the world was working when it came to economics and also your economy and income. And I just found that really, really interesting. And I also found economics gave me the tools, like the statistical tools to explain it. And then it was up to me to explain what those things meant. And it was also a challenge. I was finding it really challenging. And I thought, I just want to do it. I'm going to
Wow.
make this my life. Watch out.
And you have, and you've done a ton of stuff, but now you are the principal economist at Youth Futures Foundation. Can you just give us a little bit of background about what Youth Futures Foundation, that's actually quite difficult to say, what it does? Why is it there?
So I call it YFF because it's much easier, but we were set up initially at the end of 2019, and it was largely because former Prime Minister Theresa May kind of looked and saw that there were these huge differences in outcomes between young people, in the groups of young people, and the most marginalized young people. And they could be marginalized for so many different reasons, like their ethnicity, income, class, gender, and they had these huge differences in like whether or not they were employed in or education. And if you know research about how that impacts your ability to live I would say almost like a normal, fulfilling life going forward, health outcomes, housing, loads of different things. And she was concerned. So we were set up, we were given some money, and we were set up at the end of 2019. And we grant funds to different areas who are trying to close that gap. We also do a lot of research. We run evaluations of all of the interventions that we're interested in as well, including ones where are related to our grants programs. And we're also really involved now in our policy and strategy. We work with employers, so employers can also be involved in making sure young people can work for them. Why are certain employers not hiring young people of all backgrounds, but also those with the most barriers to going into good employment?
It sounds like a huge area, but can you tell me why it's so exciting for you? I mean, what kind of a difference can you, as a principal economist, and you can explain that term as well, make?
Yeah, I think so. For me as a principal economist, I get to ask some really difficult questions like, what would happen if the living wage was increased and now all young people, regardless of their age, receive the same wage? Because currently, young people who are under a certain age receive a lower wage, or young people who are on an apprenticeship receive a really small wage. Well, what happens if all of that goes up? And what happens to the economy? Is there a change in jobs? Is there a change in the sectors young people will work with? Does it change how young people change their behavior? Will they see a new opportunity for them? Young people who aren't as inclined to go into full-time education, not every young person wants to go into uni. That's not their goal. Will they see this as an option because they come from their parents were in poverty, they grew up in poverty, they don't see that as a high enough wage to get them, to incentivize them to go into that thread, and they don't see that as for them because it's so low? Does this change how their behavior, and what is that change? So that's what I get to do. I get to do these really difficult questions, and then I have presentations to our policy team, and I say, this is what the change could be, this is how it could be. And they have contacts in the government, they have contacts in the all of the political parties. We have an election coming up, as you said. We might have a new government, and they are consistently making inroads within and influencing within these ministers and future ministers and whoever, so that we can see these changes and we can help represent young people when they cannot represent themselves. And we're able to do it with really good evidence, so that there's almost no way they can't say no, if that makes sense.
But they can. We know that as well. But
do.
You've got huge potential influence there to inform. But of course, you can take a horse to water. I'm not talking about any political party in particular, but you can only influence by showing them the evidence. Are there signs, Andrea, that they are listening more now, that parties are now tuning into the fact that we have to start thinking about what our next generation, what the current young generation is going to do? Because it's a pretty dismal situation, isn't it, in the economy at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I think even from COVID, it was clear that they were starting to look at what we almost coined the COVID generation of young people differently. They went through significant challenges in COVID, where they were having exams online, they were having learning online, and then they went off to uni and it was online and it was all really difficult for them. And we're seeing an increase in mental health issues with young people, with the fact that, I think it's 1 in 3 young people who are not in education, employment, or training have mental health issues, or they're struggling with their mental health. And I think the government and those in policy are seeing that as a clear challenge. They've been releasing more and more work on this. And I think they are relatively receptive to this idea that their future, quite frankly, their future workforce may not be equipped to work. And if you're looking at future growth and future outputs, the UK is in a recession currently. And if you're looking long term, what does that mean when a large segment, over 770,000 young people, are not learning or earning? What does that mean for your future economy? What does that mean for your current economy? And I think they're starting to realize a bit differently that different policies will work on different cohorts of young people. And I think they're really starting to listen. We've been doing a lot of work on, can we understand what makes a young person more likely to not learn or earn? Can we capture them early? Can we capture them at 12, at 14, and target them with resources so that they don't have the bad outcome? We've had a lot of interest for stuff like that from Department for Education, because I think they see that this is stuff that they can really use. And so I think there has been some changes and some increase in interest, but I'm keen to see what they do with the spring budget as to whether or not that'll actually come to fruition.
What do you think is going to happen with the spring budget? Be honest. Do you think they're going to recognize all those things you said and how important it is? Or do you think we're still going to have more of the same?
I think, and I'm not, do not quote me as a politics expert or policy person.
Fair enough.
Okay. Do not quote me after the spring budget and say, you were absolutely wrong. What is wrong with you? Stay in your field. But I cannot see an outcome or a circumstance where you have now officially, you are in a recession. Your country is in a recession, and you're in a recession largely because people have stopped spending their money. The UK people cannot afford to spend their money. And we are a services economy, right? Our economy is based on people spending their money. Yeah, that's to the basic level. People spend their money. That's it. That is what we largely grow. That's what our economy is largely based on. And if you are the government and you see that and you recognize there's a reason people cannot spend their money, you have done some work on cost of living. You have tried to understand cost of living, but young people had some of the highest increases in their cost of living bundle because they spend a lot of money on food. They spend their money. They're we call the multiplier effect. They spend their money. They do not save. They can't afford to save because they do not save. So if you're looking at that and you're trying to understand how do we bolster an economy, I think I've heard that they're looking at maybe tax reductions and stuff like that. I am not sure about that. I'm not sure whether that will be substantial enough to bolster an economy, but then I am not the Treasury. I do not make these decisions. I think instead we would be really interested in, it goes back to a policy I mentioned earlier, we really want to see them increase the national living wage for young people under the age of 21. It is going, I think part of it is going, but I think it's the 19 and under are still going to be on that same low wage. And if you have an economy where people are not spending their money, you have a group of young people who have not had a pay rise in that way in a very long time. And they are on, I think apprenticeships are, I think the under 19s are on about £4 something. And do not quote me. It's about £4 something an hour. So if it is very low. And so if that's, if you're a young person and say, I think this is always the example, but I'm in the North, so I'm allowed to say this. If you're in the North and you're on a really low wage, you're unable to go to university because of, your parents can't help you afford it, and you're trying to work and you find that your wage is that low, what is your economy supposed to look like, and what are you supposed to do with that? And I think the government hopefully will think of addressing that. Whether or not I think that will happen, I think you can capture my skepticism, but they do have a general election coming up, and I'm hoping they recognize this as something that they actually could take forward, and they should, because it's the right thing to do. It's not just because it's politically it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, Susan,
does it matter who votes though?
I don't. So I'm not one who believes in polls all the time, and this is someone who is involved in survey design and questionnaire design. But I think if you're a current incumbent or current government and you see that it does not matter who votes at this point, you probably be out of the government. You may be trying to maybe submit your, what we call in the state, submit your almost like what people think of you, your long-lasting, ideals. This is what I did at the end of my government. But I don't know.
I'm just wondering, would it be different if, because I'm hearing increasingly young people kind of not thinking about not voting, and if they were more likely to vote, would their interests be more represented in policy, or the contrary to that is, a lot of the policies seem designed for older people who are more likely to go out and vote. So that bit of change in the economy, the future workforce that you mentioned earlier, that the older people need to have the interests of the future workforce at heart, because they're going to be the ones paying the taxes for the services that people need. That whole, everything is interlinked in the economy.
Yes.
And I find it really hard as soon as people try and separate out bits, because there's always a knock-on effect.
Yeah, and I think I don't like to pit like the older generation against the younger generation. We see this, quite frankly, a lot in the States, where the younger generation, or people who vote usually in the older generation, are voting for a party that is trying to dismantle services that the older generation use, which is usually very contradictory. It's weird that happens. Whereas in the UK, you don't see that as much, to an extent. And I don't know if, when generations are voting, if they're actually thinking of it that way, if they're thinking, well, it doesn't matter, those young people have time to work, they can save like I did. I don't know if older generation is actually thinking like that. I think they're thinking, this government has said they're going to keep the triple lock on my pension.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to vote. That's how I personally think people vote. And maybe it's because I'm no longer considered a young person, maybe because I've entered my mid to late 30s, and it's now, I think differently, but I also have a 6-year-old, and I do think of her when I vote, but what I would like the future to look like. But I don't think most people vote like that. I think people vote about what they see. Politics is very short-termism. They vote what they would like to see over the next 6 months, 12 months to a year and a half. And the governments do not always explain to people that what they want to see will happen over 2 years, 5 years, 10, because they themselves need those quick, short-term policies to keep their base, to keep them interested, and to continue to do the other thing. So I don't personally think people vote like that. I don't think people think like that when they vote. But I do think there is a really good opportunity for some like cross-generational understanding about how things work differently for younger generations than they used to, even for people. I'm a millennial. The economy doesn't look the same when I was, that age. Things do not look the same when I was that age. The education system did not look the same when I was an international student. It's now much different. All of these things have changed, even between millennials and the next generation. So I think there's a really good opportunity for this cross-generational conversation and understanding about why certain things impact them differently. And that's also something about we're trying to do as an organization.
I was going to say, is that your role then, to basically show them a different path, show them different options, different policies, and just connect? Because there seems to be a huge disconnect. We don't need to know about young people when we get to, well, certainly my age. I'm double what you are, lady. What can I say? But, we stop thinking about other people. It's like climate change as well. It's like, that's for somebody else. That's for the next generation down the road. How are you and your organization going to change the mindset? And I see here that Martin Valenti's put in a lovely contribution here, saying, with the caliber of Dr. Barry and Professor Mariana Mazzucato speaking about the new approach to economics, he feels there is a mindset shift happening, which is encouraging. I think what we're saying at the moment is, are we seeing that mind shift change? Are you encouraged? And
I think amongst economists, you are definitely seeing a mind shift change. I think amongst those in our field. But again, this is this is a view, and I think even you can include the US, and I go back to them sometimes because a lot of policy comes out of the US, a lot of economic thinking comes out of the US as well. And we are sort of seeing a shift in I would say, the economists who work in the US, who work for the US versus those who work in Europe. Whether I think there is a significant shift in how the general public is seeing things, I would need evidence more evidence for that, I would want maybe some really good quality surveys, or maybe to look in the census to see how people, and that's, the census is the census, and just to see how people are really thinking about this, and whether or not people are clued into the way we think people are because of the prevalence of social media. Not everyone is on Twitter, or X, I should say. Not everyone is on X. Not everyone is on, I don't think most people are on LinkedIn. Sorry, LinkedIn. I don't think most people are on X. And I don't think most people are on TikTok. And a lot of young people.
How do you reach them? How do you reach them? How do you have those conversations and connections that break down those walls and expose what needs to be done?
I think, and I used to work for Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And one thing that they did, I thought really well, was understand where your audience was based in how to communicate really well of what you were trying to do to each audience. Mm-hmm. And so they were trying to put, some research we were doing, some analysis we were doing, and they were trying to get it in the most read paper in the country, which I believe is the Daily Mail, mm-hmm. In the Telegraph, in Financial Times, and they were trying to make it so the Guardian. So if you were reading it as a normal average reader, you would see the headline would be slightly different, but the end would be the same. So you would still get there and you would be able to read it and understand it. And I thought that was really, I wouldn't say necessarily innovative, but I thought it was really smart because it really recognized that people do not all read the same text. They don't read it the same way. They don't look at it the same way. We at Your Futures, I've started a data dashboard where we put all of the economic data about young people in one source without much narrative, because there's some narrative about this is what you're seeing. Here, can we explain employment? We can explain unemployment, and we can break it down, as you say, in plain English, in plain terms, so people can really understand. And then we also link to, so what do you do with this? Well, here's our toolkit, our youth employment toolkit. And this is what you do. You go to the toolkit and you can see what works to solve what you just found. And I think that linking of resources is really helpful. One, for people to understand that young people's outcomes are really important. It does not matter that they're young and, they're not really working right now, but it doesn't matter because I've got another 40 to 50 years of working. That's not a good answer. We need something more than that. And I think continuing to push this to the public consciousness so they understand that actually you really should care if Timmy down the street has been off work and not even going to uni or college or something. That's really bad. And that's something we need to work on. And if Timmy has, a special educational need and the school has had cuts, so now they can't actually help him with his special educational need, that's something also we need to address and we need to look at. So I'm hoping with the new general election coming up, I hope people aren't as apathetic as maybe people think they are. I'm hoping that they're as interested because, one, they can see with the cost of living crisis that this stuff really does matter and it impacts them. Why did the UK have one of the worst cost of living, inflation increases in quite a bit? Why is the UK in a recession? Those types of things. And they start to wonder, what does this mean? What is my role in it? And what can I do? I'm really hoping, I'm hopeful, it's the American in me. I'm really hopeful for my citizens, my fellow Brits. I'm almost a Brit now, so I can say that, my fellow Brits. I'm really hopeful that they see that this is all really important. And and again, as at Youth Futures Foundation, this is something that we do. We try to represent young people with young people. Young people sit on our board. We have a Future Voices group. They feed into all of the decisions we make when it comes to this stuff as well.
I'd love to talk about that in a second. Susan, do you want to jump in? Because you're sitting there nodding along. And I know that Mike Larkin's more optimistic than we thought people were out there. So
sorry, I was busy coughing, so I put myself on mute. I just put Mike Larkin's put a link to his blog up there, so that's now available for everyone to see. I'm just really interested. I love your optimism. Mike's now apologizing for his arthritic fingers. We will excuse those fingers. I'm sure you're fine. I'm just really, I love the optimism, and I just think I really do think that medicine's loss is economics gain, because you're so passionate about the subject and the numbers and just actually how talking about those numbers and sharing those with people and then linking that to the toolkit, it gives a different result. Because I think sometimes it's the assumptions that people can make in data when they haven't really questioned it. And I think that rigor of really interrogating, what do the numbers tell you and what do they mean, and that kind of thing. I'm always on this. I'm really fascinated by the way Martin Lewis explains student loans. I don't know if you've seen him do it, but whenever he does, whenever he does it, it's really clear that most of the people in the audience don't understand that really it's not a loan, it's more of a graduate tax. And those questions in there, just from the audience, just really show the level of understanding or not understanding on something that until you use that thing, you don't necessarily need to understand it. So that it's things like that I think the work that you're doing will really make a difference with.
It's super clear communication. And I think I just want to ask you about this as well. When you mentioned that young people are on your board and they feed into that process, what are they telling you are the issues and the stumbling blocks in society that they want you to come up with some idea of how to overcome, so that you can present that to the policymakers and the politicians?
So yeah, they not only tell us what they think is wrong, they actually tell us how they think we should solve it as well. That's
really
how they are to our work. They feed. I think I have a young person or some type of young people involvement in most of the research projects that I lead on as well. So one of the examples is on we call it NEETs, so not in employment, education, or training. And it was that initial work trying to understand what are the reasons or the factors or the barriers that make someone more likely to be out of employment, not, inactive, is not able to really do anything. And their main involvement in that work was sense checking whether or not our analysis matched their experiences. And I think that was really powerful, because their experiences, I recognize as someone who uses data, their experiences may not be in data. If you're from the Gypsy Roma traveler community, you are almost entirely not captured in national data, because your population is so small. And your experiences is something we call in data gaps. A research project I led on is that the data does not represent you culturally as well. It does not represent your experiences culturally, and it does not represent, this could be on ethnicity, it could be from where your parents are from, but it doesn't represent your day-to-day life. So how do we make sure your day-to-day life actually gets to the people you need to know? And that's why I'm really proud that as an organization, we make sure that they have this input. And I think we've had so much input from them in the past, including stuff on how they are told, some young people from like a Pakistani or Bangladeshi background are told at a young age that they will not amount to anything from careers advisors. They're told that people like them do not do law degrees. They're told that people like them do not go to university. And this is to young women, even, young Pakistani or Bangladeshi women, and even to young women as a whole, maybe this should not be something you should look at. And this is something they're told. And when you're young, you're not sure, is this real or is this not real, if that makes sense? It's discriminatory. We've done multiple surveys where we were trying to understand, how do young people make decisions, but also how much are they discriminated against in the labor market? And what we're being told is that they are often discriminated against in the labor market. And some of it's on ethnicity, but some of it's actually on their age. People do not think that they have the skills to do what needs to be done. And they don't always think that they know how to talk very well, and that they are not articulate enough to explain their own experiences. And women get this all the time. You go to a doctor, they think that somehow you have no idea what pain is. But it's the same with young people, that the system does not think they can explain their own problem. And that itself is a huge barrier to making sure young people are involved. And I think for me, that was probably the biggest thing that I've learned from them, which is how much they are just simply not listened to in the first place.
So how do you break down that barrier? I mean, I know you're doing your bit in the foundation and everything. How do you get that message out there? For God's sake, this is complete. It's mad to ignore this cohort of people who are articulate and who know what they need in life. They may need some guidance, we all do, but don't discount them. How do you get that out there?
I think it's always still like, whenever we go and do events in the House of Lords, or the House of Commons, we bring young people along. We have them tell their stories. And they're telling them to MPs. They're telling them to other members of, the House of Lords or the House of Commons, and they're telling their story in their own words. We do not give them a script. We don't tell them what they should be saying. We just say, it's your floor, because it's your life. It's not my life. I'm planning my 40th birthday celebrations soon. Okay, this is not my life, it's yours. And I think that has been really helpful because it, again, you visualize the person you're talking about, you visualize the group, you see them, you recognize that they actually exist. They're not just all interested in TikTok, and you're not infantilizing them in the way that young people are. And I think that's really helpful. I wish the government, a future government, would have something that we have at eFutures and other organizations have, which is not even just one little group of young people, but consistently in every constituency, they're talking to people of all ages, of all backgrounds, to understand what they want, and they are collating that information in a concise way that they can use for policy development. But I do not think they do that in a systemic way across the country.
Wouldn't that be a great idea to see that happening? I think we're running out of time, but I do want to ask you, and maybe you have already answered it, but what's the one thing you wish everyone knew about economics as a subject?
I wish everyone knew that we are not all the stuffy data people. If you know me, you know I love data, but I also love explaining data to people in a way that they can understand and use, because otherwise it's not useful. And not every single one of us looks like that. Economics is not, I wouldn't say it's not difficult, because that is subjective, but it's not a thing you cannot learn to understand, even on a more basic level. It's really important to understand what economics is in the economy, and how that relates to why you're able to find a house in your area. It's all related to a system. It's all related to this economic system. And the more you understand it, the more likely you'll be able to challenge your MP when they say something in the House of Commons, challenge your prime minister when they're suggesting something, and even on a basic level, and say that won't work for me because of this bit of the economy. And I think if we could do that, if people could understand that about the economy and economics, I think it'd be really, really positive going forward.
Absolutely. Agree with you there. Susan, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think it's just time to sum up. We're slightly over on our time. So thanks very much, Andrea. Thanks again, Claire. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. It will be a few weeks until our next Economy in Plain English session. And in the meantime, you can catch up with the past recordings on YouTube and LinkedIn. The David Hume Institute will be hosting an in-person event next week about understanding Scotland's economy. And we do that every quarter. So this will be our new quarterly data, although point taken, Andrea, it's not all about data. It is about the stories that make it up, and enabling all voices to be heard in those. More details of the event next week are on our website. Please remember, we are a charity, and we can only continue to bring you new research and thought-provoking events because of the generous donations from our supporters. So if you can spare any money, please do donate via our website. And then finally, it's just left for me to say thank you to everyone. We've loved having you here, Andrea, and really interesting to hear about your work and the work of the Youth Futures Foundation. So until next time, cheerio for now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.